Welcome back to Roundhouse Radio, 98.3. I'm Kirk LePointe. I'll be your host until 8 o'clock tonight. We've been conducting a series of candidate discussions. I don't call them debates, pretty much. They haven't been too testy so far. No one's gotten in shouting matches with each other. There's always a chance in this segment, but I somehow doubt it. Shane Simpson is with me. He's the NDP MLA for Vancouver-Hastings. One of his challengers in this race is David Wong, who's with the Greens. We invited Jane Spitz of the Liberals to attend, but she declined. We're sorry to hear that, but we have a debate, a discussion with the two of them. David, let me start with you in this segment here. Housing and housing affordability remain in the province probably the largest issues at the moment in this campaign. Your party has suggested that it wants to take the 15% foreign buyers tax and double it, move it to 30%. What do you think that would achieve?
We're going to discourage outsiders from coming into BC and buying up property and use it for speculative purposes. That's wrong, because homes are for living. It's not for flipping. And it's the biggest formula right now in terms of the housing affordability crisis, because the cost of land just keeps on going up. So we have to dampen that. 30% across the entire province, not just the Metro Vancouver region. That would help towards cooling that down. And we're also looking at a property transfer tax that's progressive and it slides. It's actually going to decrease for people buying homes in towards the lower end, under $200,000. They actually would be paying zero on that. And it moves up to 12% for homes over $2 million.
Yeah. Shane, I think the last $200,000 home that we had in Vancouver was probably last decade. I think it feels like it's just been forever.
But this is for the whole province.
Yeah, exactly. And there are, of course, many places. But you can see, Shane, you can see this wave moving eastward in the city of Vancouver with the unaffordable house. And what I wonder about is, Liberals have brought in a 15% tax. Greens are suggesting it ought to be doubled. Where would the NDP go on this one?
Well, one of the areas that we think we have to deal with is the rampant speculation. And we've proposed a speculation tax on people who don't pay income tax in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. So you purchase a home here. You aren't living here, so you're not paying tax on whatever your work income is. And you're not renting it, so you're not paying income tax on rental income. If that's the case, you're leaving it vacant, is the assumption. Then we'll tax that at 2% of the value of that home every year. To discourage that, so that we start
on top of the empty homes tax.
On top of that, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we put that in place as a way to deal with speculation and people who are being entirely speculative. But part of the challenge here is to deal with the question of where people live more than what the investment is. And that's why we've proposed to build 114,000 homes across the province over 10 years. And that's our commitment, a new co-op program. Hopefully the feds will be involved in that. Nonprofits, rental housing being the prominent components of this. And moving forward and starting to do that. The other thing we have to do is deal with the rental question. We have so many renters in this city and in the province who are having a desperate time because of loopholes like the fixed lease loophole. We will end that. Dem evictions and rent evictions. We will deal with that. Spencer Chandler Herbert, my colleague, has introduced legislation a couple of times that would have addressed that issue. So we need to do that. We've also talked about the $400 renter rebate to put a little bit of money in people's pockets. And one of the pieces that I think is most effective is building student housing, allowing universities to borrow to build student housing and build more housing and they're not allowed to borrow currently. There are about 30,000 students who come into our city and rent for the school year. If we can remove a portion of those, that's going to open up rental housing that's in the affordable range.
How would that differ, though, than what is in my neighborhood, which is, I have a ton of housing that's being built for students on campus at UBC. Presumably there are other places where this is happening across the province. What would be different about your plan?
Well, right now, what's happening is those campuses are asking for the right to build more housing because there's a demand, but the government won't allow them the authority to borrow to build.
Oh, okay.
So right now, they're
So you would?
We would say if you're borrowing to build rental housing, we support that, and we believe you're going to get that money back because that housing's going to be full. Yeah. But the government currently won't allow that to happen.
David, as a as a series of things to address, issues involving housing, whether it's supply of certain stock of housing or incentives or disincentives and all of that. What's your view on, say, let's start with the element of the $400 rebate that the NDP would propose. Is that an effective remedy?
I don't think so, because $400 rebate, all that means if two individuals are looking at a place to rent, a person who comes in after the first person can say, well, I've got another extra $400. It's just going to bump the price up by $400. So all that means is going to actually increase the potential rent of a place. So we don't think it's effective.
What is effective then? What can a province do around this? Because there are certain boundaries that are clearly overridden by things like market pressures and things like that.
Well, let's take some of that off. What we can look at is that poverty reduction. One of the ideas that's been talked about and the BC Greens are advocating is a basic income. If we actually introduce a basic income, that would go a long ways towards helping individuals who, for example, transition out of a government care place and they're a young person. They don't have to worry about having a roof over their head. They don't have to worry about childcare. They can actually focus on what they want to do, perhaps build a career, and actually have the basic income cover that.
So rather than approach the issue from trying to get cooling down of the housing market or more supply that would be within a particular range, you would want to approach it from the other end, which is to try to provide an income support program?
Well, it's an integrated solution because we don't, it's not just in isolation, because when we start looking at things as individual silos, it doesn't make sense. We have to look at, even the elders' care. That has to be integrated with young persons, child care. All these things should be looked at as an integrated solution, and it's like an ecosystem, if I can use that analogy. And for us to look at transportation, housing, and childcare and education, all that separate silos, it doesn't make sense. If everything's all community-based and actually create the opportunities to make this happen, we would go a long way, and we can address a lot of these so-called problems just by thinking it more holistically.
When you deal with affordability questions, and that's probably a primary focus of what we're talking about. We talk about three phases for our campaign. It's about affordability, it's about improving services, and it's about jobs that are part of a sustainable economy and that in fact produce incomes that allow you to support a family. Affordability is about, in fact, putting a few dollars back in people's pockets. And it may not be important to the Greens to put $400 back in a renter's pocket, but for a renter, somebody who's struggling, that extra money does mean something.
But it works out to about
$35 a month.
Well,
about
$35 a day, but it's also split in the unit, isn't it?
It's about $35, and it begins there. If you put in place the proper residential controls, tenancy controls, you begin to deal with some of the speculative side for bad landlords, and it's a minority of landlords, but there's a minority of bad landlords out there, and you can deal with that. But when you deal with affordability, you have to deal with what you're doing with ICBC. A 42% increase in ICBC is proposed by the government, 28% on hydro. These are both areas we're talking about dealing with. So when David talks about an integrated approach, when you talk about affordability, you need to look at all of those measures where you can create a level of affordability. And that's why you also want to do things like the $15 minimum wage that we've proposed, that puts a few more dollars and begins to drive wages up. And we need to do that in this province, and certainly in Metro Vancouver, if we're going to be successful.
But shouldn't it be income-based, income-linked? So a millionaire like, say, Jim Pattison, he can afford to have childcare.
And that's exactly what John has talked about.
This is what it's about. He doesn't need that $10 a day childcare, nor does he need that $400 subsidy. So, in other words,
now, and to be fair, Shane, initially it was a little confusing on what the NDP was proposing in terms of the $400. It appeared to be a universal payment. You're saying it's means tested at some point.
I'm saying that, that money will go to the people who need that money. Yeah. And frankly, we see early childhood education as exactly that. And in the same way that
it shouldn't be universal. There should
be a universal aspect to it. We see that as important, and $10 a day is what the educators and the advocates and the people who are in favor of the system and the people who think about the system say that's what works. Okay. And that's who we're working with, the people who will make that happen.
Fair. It's got to be fair. The ones who can, who have the resources and the ability to do so, they shouldn't be getting subsidized. It's the people who are really at the bottom end who really need it. And, I grew up in this neighborhood. I see. So you can't tell me that person who's got 3 kids and single parent, is in the same league as a person who's got, a multi-million-dollar home.
Okay, so last minute or so, and boy, these conversations run their course so quickly. Let's just say you're elected on May 9th, and the Premier happens to be in your party. What's the first bit of advice you bring the Premier, Shane?
Well, I think the first bit of advice is to lay the priorities out for the first year, to bring the cabinet together, lay out those priorities, make them very clear to the people of the province as to what the direction is moving forward. If we know anything about this, is that people are looking for certainty. They want to know what you're doing. They want to know that when decisions are made, they're made in a thoughtful way. And in fact, you're going to continue with them and not change your mind in 6 months or a year. Okay. So you bring certainty to the table. You lay a plan out that people can look at and know that's where you're going, and then you implement it and be accountable for it.
David Wong, what would be your first advice to the Premier?
We're going to do exactly what we're talking about, to collaborate, cooperate with everyone. And that includes all the municipalities and all the other parties who are involved. And we expect the same, cooperation, because we're not here to snipe and to have an adversarial relationship. We're going to work together and build the best for the province of BC and all its people.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in. Like I say, these conversations go way too swiftly. There's lots more that we could talk about in this time, but wish you both success on May 9th in achieving your goals.
Thanks, Kirk.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kirk.
Shane Simpson of the NDP and David Wong of the Greens. You're listening to Roundhouse Radio 98.3. I'm Kirk LePointe. We'll be back in a moment.